The old blue robe hung loose around my shoulders like an old friend. It was soft and worn, with tiny holes near the pockets where I'd caught it on rose thorns over the years. The sleeves were a bit frayed, and the color had faded from deep ocean blue to something more like a cloudy sky. But it was perfect for Saturday mornings. I'm Eleanor, by the way. 57 years old, though I prefer to say 57 years young. I used to work at the town library for 32 years. Now I'm retired, and I love the peace and quiet of my little life. My neighborhood is the kind of place where nothing much happens. The loudest sounds are usually birds singing in the morning, or old Mr. Henderson cutting his grass with that ancient lawnmower of his. But this Saturday morning was going to be different. I just didn't know it yet. The rain had finally stopped. For a whole week, it had been drizzling and gray outside. Everything looked sad and wet. But now the sun was trying to peek through the clouds, and the world outside my kitchen window looked fresh and clean. The air smelled like wet earth and growing things, even through the glass. I was on my second cup of coffee, the strong, dark kind that really wakes you up. I stood by the window, looking out at my small backyard garden. The rose bushes looked happy after all that rain. Water drops hung on the red and pink petals like tiny jewels. It was so peaceful and quiet. This was the kind of peace you earn after years of busy days and rushing around. Now I could take my time with everything. I could drink my coffee slowly. I could watch the birds. I could just breathe. I was thinking about what to do with my morning. Should I work on the crossword puzzle from yesterday's newspaper? Or maybe start reading that new book about the Civil War that I'd bought last week? I was still deciding when I heard something that made me stop. Knock, knock. It was soft and careful, like someone wasn't sure they should be there. Now, that was strange. I wasn't expecting anyone. My daughter Sarah lives far away to whole states. My few friends in town always call before they come over. People selling things don't usually come down our quiet street. And when I order something online, they just leave it on the porch. I set down my coffee mug, the white one with cheerful yellow sunflowers painted on it, and walked through my living room. My slippers made soft sounds on the old carpet, with its faded flower pattern. The big grandfather clock in the hallway kept ticking its steady beat, like a slow heartbeat for the whole house. That clock had been there when I bought the house, and its sound was as familiar as my own breathing. Knock, knock. This time it was a little louder, but still gentle and polite. I walked to the front door and looked through the small peephole. Standing on my porch was Arthur Jenkins from across the street. Arthur had lived there for about 30 years, the same as me. We'd always been polite neighbors. We waved when we got our mail. We said good morning when we both took out our trash cans. But that was about it. Arthur was a quiet man who kept to himself. He became even more quiet after his wife Martha died 2 years ago. That had been so sad. She was a nice woman with a kind smile. Looking through the peephole, I could see that. Arthur looked different today. Usually, he was very neat and tidy. His gray hair was always combed just right. His clothes were always clean and pressed. But today, his hair looked messy, like the wind had been blowing through it. And he was holding something wrapped in what looked like an old kitchen towel. My curiosity got the better of me. I'd always been curious. It came from working in the library for so many years, I suppose. I undid the chain lock and opened the door. I pulled my blue robe a little tighter around me, more from habit than because I was cold. Arthur, I said, trying to sound friendly. I was surprised to see him, and I'm sure it showed in my voice. Good morning. Is everything okay? He blinked at me like he was surprised too. Maybe surprised to see me, or maybe just surprised to find himself standing at my door. His eyes were pale blue, like a winter sky, and they looked watery. There was something in his expression that I couldn't quite figure out. Was he nervous? Sad? Maybe both. Eleanor, he said. His voice sounded rough, like he hadn't talked to anyone yet that morning. I'm really sorry to bother you, especially so early. And you're still in your robe and everything. He looked embarrassed and gestured at my blue robe. I smiled at him. Don't worry about it at all, Arthur. Saturday mornings are for robes in this house. Would you like to come in for some coffee? You look like you could use a warm cup. I surprised myself by asking. I don't usually invite people over without planning it first, but something about the way he looked so uncertain and vulnerable made me want to help him feel better. He hesitated, looking past me into my hallway, then back at my face. That's very kind of you, Eleanor. Thank you. I don't want to be a bother though. It's no bother at all. I said, stepping back to let him in. The coffee is fresh. And I was just standing around anyway. Arthur shuffled into my house, bringing with him the smell of damp wool from his jacket and something else, something sweet and earthy that I couldn't identify. He stood awkwardly in my small entrance hall, still holding his wrapped bundle, carefully in both hands. Please, go sit in the living room, I said, pointing toward the archway. I'll get you a mug of coffee. As I walked to my kitchen, I wondered what this was all about. Arthur Jenkins on my doorstep with a mystery package. It wasn't like him at all. My mind started racing with possibilities. Was he sick? Did he need help with something? Martha's death had hit him so hard. Everyone in the neighborhood could see how much he missed her. He'd become even more of a hermit after she passed away. I reached for my favorite coffee mug, a different one from the sunflower mug I'd been using. This one was hand-painted with tiny blue flowers. I poured the hot coffee, and the rich smell filled my small kitchen. It was a comforting, everyday smell in a situation that was starting to feel anything but everyday. I added a little milk to Arthur's coffee, remembering vaguely that Martha used to drink hers that way. It was just a guess, but I hoped it was right. When I came back to the living room, Arthur was sitting on the very edge of my sofa, the one with the faded flowered pattern that I'd bought 15 years ago. He looked like he might jump up and run away at any second. The dish towel bundle was still in his lap, and he hadn't unwrapped it. The morning light was getting stronger now, coming through my white lace curtains and making soft, pretty patterns on the rug. Everything looked normal and peaceful, but I could feel that something important was about to happen. Arthur took the mug I offered him. His hands shook just a little. Thank you, Eleanor. This smells wonderful. He took a small sip and closed his eyes for a moment, like he was really enjoying the warmth. You always were such a good neighbor. I sat down in my favorite armchair across from him, the one where I usually curled up with a book and a cup of tea in the evenings. So Arthur, I said gently, not wanting to pressure him but curious about why he'd come. What brings you over this morning? Is everything all right? He looked down at the bundle in his lap. His fingers traced the faded pattern on the old cotton dish towel. It was pale yellow with little baby chicks embroidered on it, the kind of sweet, homey thing you might find at a church sale. It looked old but well cared for. Well, yes and no, he said slowly, still looking at the towel instead of at me. I've been doing some cleaning out, going through Martha's things. It's taken me a long time to work up the courage to tackle some of it. His voice caught just a little when he said Martha's name, and my heart ached for him. Grief is such a long, hard road, and everyone has to walk it in their own way and at their own speed. I understand, I said softly. Take all the time you need, Arthur. There's no hurry with these kinds of things. You do what feels right for you. He nodded, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. They were filled with such deep sadness, but also something else, a kind of hopeful uncertainty. She had so many collections, he continued, little things that mattered to her, things that might not seem important to other people, but they were precious to her. He paused, taking another sip of coffee, gathering his courage, and I found something I think Martha would have wanted you to have it. Me? I was completely surprised. Martha and I had been friendly, sure, but in that casual neighbor way. We chatted over the fence about our gardens sometimes. We exchanged Christmas cards every year. We occasionally complained to each other about the town council's decisions, but we weren't close friends who shared secrets or anything like that. What could she possibly have wanted me to have? The curiosity I'd felt earlier came back even stronger, mixed with something else, a kind of warm anticipation. The air in the room seemed to grow still and quiet. Even the grandfather clock seemed to be ticking louder, marking each second as Arthur prepared to show me his little mystery. I could see the slight tremor in his hands as he began to slowly, carefully unfold the corners of the yellow dish towel. Whatever was wrapped inside was clearly precious to him, and for some reason, he thought it might become precious to me too. The whole situation felt so unexpected and intimate. Sitting here in my living room on a Saturday morning, me in my old blue robe, him with his carefully wrapped secret, it felt like something significant was about to happen, as if a door I didn't even know existed was about to open. Arthur's fingers, a little gnarled with age, but surprisingly gentle, fumbled slightly with the last fold of the faded towel. He took a deep breath, a small shaky sound in the quiet room, and then he revealed what was inside. It was a plant, a small, humble-looking succulent nestled in a simple terracotta pot. The pot was plain and reddish-brown, the kind you could buy at any garden center. The plant itself had thick, fleshy leaves that were a dusty green color with soft purple edges. The leaves grew in a spiral pattern that was actually quite intricate and beautiful if you looked closely. It wasn't a showy plant at all. Not like my bright red and pink roses outside, or the flashy orange hibiscus that I fussed over every winter to keep it alive. This was a quiet, sturdy little thing that seemed perfectly content to just be itself. For a moment, I just stared at it, a little confused. A plant? This was the treasure that Martha had wanted me to have? Don't get me wrong, I love plants, but I was expecting something more personal, maybe a piece of jewelry, or a book, or some little keepsake. Arthur watched my face carefully, his own expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. It's a Haworthia, he said, his voice barely louder than a whisper. Martha loved these little succulents. She had a whole collection of them on the kitchen windowsill. She used to say they reminded her of stars, the way the leaves grew in that spiral pattern. He reached out and touched one of the leaves very lightly, almost like he was afraid he might hurt it. This one was her absolute favorite. I know it's not much to look at, I suppose, if you don't know these plants well. I looked closer, then really looked at it. I noticed how the light from my window caught the slightly see-through tips of the leaves. I saw the perfect geometric way they spiraled outward from the center. There was a subtle beauty to it, a quiet strength and resilience. And knowing that it had been Martha's favorite, that she had cared for it and loved it, suddenly made it seem valuable in a completely different way. Arthur, it's lovely, I said, and I really meant it. It's not just a plant anymore, is it? It's a piece of Martha's life that you're sharing with me. But I was still puzzled about one thing. But why me? I asked gently. Surely you have family members, or closer friends, who would appreciate it more. He shook his head, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. Our children live so far away, and they have their own busy lives, with work and kids and everything. They wouldn't really appreciate it. Not the way Martha did. Not the way I thought you might. He paused, looking out my window toward his house across the street, then back at me. Martha always admired your garden, Eleanor. She'd often stand at her kitchen window, just looking out at your flowers. She said you had a real gift, a natural way with growing things. She said you understood plants, that you could tell what they needed. My heart felt warm at his words. I had no idea that Martha had been watching my garden, or that she thought so well of my humble efforts. We gardeners usually work alone, you know. Our successes and failures are mostly witnessed by the bees and butterflies and birds. To know that someone had been paying attention, had truly appreciated what I was trying to do well, that was a wonderful gift all by itself, she told me once. Arthur continued, his voice getting a little stronger as he went on, that if anything ever happened to her, she'd want her special plants to go to someone who would talk to them. She used to talk to all of hers, you know. I'd hear her in the kitchen sometimes, having whole conversations with them like they were old friends. I smiled at that image, Martha chatting away with her little succulent collection. It sounded exactly like something she would do. The little Haworthia sat there in its simple pot, looking perfectly content and patient, as if it was waiting to see what would happen next. In the morning light, I could see tiny details I'd missed before. The delicate patterns on each leaf, the way they fit together so perfectly, the quiet dignity of this small living thing. I realized that this wasn't just about a plant at all. This was about connection, about one person caring enough to make sure something precious found its way to someone who would cherish it. This was about neighbors becoming something more than just people who wave at each other across the street. I would be honored to take care of Martha's favorite plant, I said, reaching out to gently touch one of the spiral leaves. And yes, I do talk to my plants. I always have. I think they like the company. Arthur's whole face brightened, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked truly relaxed. She would be so happy, he said softly. She really would. As I sat there in my old blue robe, holding this unexpected gift from a woman I'd barely known, but who had somehow seen something in me worth trusting, I felt something shift inside my quiet Saturday morning world. Sometimes the most important moments come disguised as ordinary ones, wrapped in old dish towels, and delivered by nervous neighbors who barely know how to ask for what they need. But that's how the best stories usually begin, isn't it? With a simple knock on the door and the courage to answer it. Telling them about her day, a chuckle escaped him, a rusty sound but genuine. Ismailed back. I've been known to have a chat with my roses now and then, he admitted, mostly scolding the aphids, but still this seemed to please him. I knew it, he said, nodding. I just had a feeling Martha was a good judge of character. Hel looked at the little succulent again, then carefully, almost ceremoniously, Hel lifted the pot from the dish towel and held it out to me. So, Eleanor, would you do us the honor? Would you take care of her little star? My hand reached a spark of shared humanity out, and my fingers closed around the cool rough clay of the pot. It was surprisingly heavy for its size, solid and reassuring as I took it from him. Our fingers brushed for a fleeting second. His skin was dry, cool, but there was a warmth in the contact, a spark of shared humanity. Arthur, I said, my voice a little thick with emotion, I would be honored. Truly, I'll find the perfect spot for it, somewhere it can get just the right amount of light, and I promise, I'll talk to it. A wave of relief washed over his face, smoothing out some of the lines of worry. He let out a long breath as if he'd been holding it for a very long time. Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you. That means more to me than I can say. He sat back against the sofa cushions, then Rial sat back. For the first time since he'd arrived, the tension seemed to drain out of him, leaving him looking older. Yes, but also softer, more at peace. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, the only sounds the ticking clock and the distant chirp of a bird outside. I held the little Horthia in my lap, its quiet presence a comforting weight. The coffee in our mugs had cooled, but neither of us seemed to notice. The initial awkwardness of his arrival had completely vanished, replaced by a sense of ease. It was strange, really. Here White's quiet presence, where two people who had lived across the street from each other for 3 decades, exchanging little more than polite nods, and now we were sharing something deeply personal, something that spoke of love and loss and the quiet continuity of life. The little plant was a bridge, a conduit for emotions that might otherwise have remained unspoken. She also left this, Arthur said. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and handed it to me. It was tucked under the pot. I think it's for the plant. I carefully unfolded it. On it, in a neat, slightly shaky feminine handwriting, were a few simple words: my little star needs morning sun, a gentle hand and a kind word now and then. Like all of us, tears pricked at my eyes. Martha's words, so simple, so wise. I looked up at Arthur and he was watching me, his own eyes suspiciously bright. She was a special woman, I said, my voice a little unsteady. He agreed softly, yes, she was. He cleared his throat. Well, I should let you cleared his throat. Get on with your Saturday. I've taken up enough of your time. He made a move, tossed and no, Arthur, please, I said, surprising myself again with my own forthrightness. Rush off, your coffee is cold. Let me get us some fresh hot cups, and perhaps you could tell me a bit more about Martha's other collections if you feel up to it, of course. I wanted to keep him there a little longer, to nurture this fragile, unexpected connection that had bloomed in my living room as unexpectedly as a desert flower after a rare rain. He looked at me, a flicker of surprise in his pale blue eyes, then a slow smile spread across his face. It was a lovely smile, one I hadn't seen before. It reached his eyes, crinkling their corners, and for a moment he looked years younger, the shadow of his grief lifting just a little. I'd like that very much, Eleanor, he said. I'd like that very much indeed. And so, on that ordinary Saturday morning, with me still in my old chenille robe, an extraordinary thing began to happen. A neighbor I'd only known from a distance became a friend, and a little star-shaped succulent became a symbol of a connection. I hadn't realized how much I'd been missing. The quiet hum of my life was still there, but it was joined by a new gentle melody. Aussie poured fresh coffee, the aroma mingling with the scent of the rain-washed air filtering through the slightly open window. A comfortable quiet settled between us again. It wasn't an ambivalence though. It was filled with unspoken things, with the gentle weight a comfortable quiet of shared understanding. Arthur seemed more relaxed now, his shoulders not quite hunched, his gaze softer as he looked around my living room. His eyes lingered in the bookshelves that lined one entire wall, crammed with books of every shape and size. Martha would have loved your books, he said, his voice still a little growly but warmer now. She was a great reader, mysteries mostly and biographies. She always said you could learn so much about living from other people's lives. I quite agree, I replied, handing him his steaming mug. That's why I became a librarian, I suppose. So many stories, so many lives, all waiting to be discovered. I settled back into my armchair, cradling the little Horthia. I'd placed it on the small table beside me, where the morning sun now breaking decisively through the clouds, could touch its leaves. Did she have a favorite author? Arthur's brow furrowed in thought. Oh, there were so many, but she did have a fondness for Agatha Christie. We used to watch the adaptations on television together. She always guessed who the murderer was long before. The end drove me mad sometimes, he added, a soft chuckle escaping him. Elod too. A woman of sharp intellect then? Oh yes, he said, a proud smiley, a woman of sharp intellect, itching his lips, sharp as a tack. My Martha, she kept me on my toes. That's for sure. He took a slow sip of his coffee. It's the quiet I'm still not used to, Hack confessed, his gaze drifting towards the window. The house feels so empty. Weren't big talkers, not all the time, but there was always her presence, the sound of her humming in the kitchen or the click of her knitting needles and thieving. I nodded, understanding completely. I'd felt that same coincidence after my own husband, Robert, passed away 10 years prior. Even thought had our share of quiet moments. His absence had created a void that took years to stop aching, quite so sharp. Life silence can be deafening, can it? I said softly. It's like the house forgets show to breathe properly. For a while Arthur looked at me, his eyes holding a deep empathetic sorrow. You understand, it wasn't a question, but a statement. I do, he affirmed. Robert, my late husband, he was a jazz musician, not famous, just played in local clubs. Our house used to be filled with music, scales in the morning, him practicing a new piece in the afternoon, the sound of his saxophone. When that stopped, the silence was awful. It took me a long time to find a new rhythm for the house, for myself. Sharing this something, he was a jazz musician, so personal, with Arthur felt surprisingly natural. Perhaps it was the robe, the informality of the morning, or perhaps it was just the right time, the right person. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face. A musician, he said, a note of interest in his voice. Martha loved music too. Big band, Moss, Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman. We used to go dancing, you know. When we were younger, she was light as a feather on her feet. A wistful look came over his face, a journey back in time visible in his eyes. I can almost picture it, I said, smiling. Did you have a favorite song you danced to? His eyes lit up. Moonlight Serenade. Hesiod without hesitation. That was our song. Whenever it played, no matter where we were, we'd find a way to dance, even if it was just a little shuffle in the living room. He demonstrated with a small movement of his shoulders a ghostly echo of a dance step. It was endearing. This was a side of Arthur Jenkins I'd never imagined. The quiet, reserved man from across the street had a history filled with love, music, and dancing. It was a reminder that everyone carries a whole world within them, a world often hidden from casual view. That's a beautiful memory, Arthur, I said. Thank you for sharing it. Thank you for listening, Gellner. He replied, it's been a while since I've talked about her like this. The children, they mean well, but they get sad, and then I feel I have to be strong for them. And friends, well, most of our old friends are gone now or in their own worlds. He looked down at his hands clasped loosely in his lap. It's good to just talk sometimes. That's all we need, isn't it? I said, a listening ear, a shared moment. We lapsed into a comfortable silence. Again, the sun had climbed higher and the room was filled with a warm, gentle light. The little Hortheus seemed to glow on the table. I found myself tracing the rim of my coffee mug, thinking about the unexpected turns life can take. Just an hour ago, I'd been contemplating a quiet Saturday of solitude. Now my living room felt different, fuller. It wasn't just me and the ticking clock anymore. There was a shared warmth, a net friendship. Her other collections? I prompted, gently remembering his earlier words. You said she had others. Arthur's face brightened a little. Oh yes, she did. Nothing valuable, mind you, not in monetary terms, but precious to her. She collected thimbles from all the places we ever visited and places friends went. She had a whole display case full of them, each one with a tiny story. Thimbles, I exclaimed. How charming. My grandmother used to collect them too. I always loved looking at Thedney pictures on them. Did she? Arthur leaned forward slightly. A new spark of connection Martha would have like that. She also collected, well, this is a bit silly. Perhaps she collected unusual buttons. She had jars of them. She'd say every button had a history, a garment it once belonged to, an occasion it had witnessed. That's not silly at all, I said. It's wonderfully imaginative. It's like seeing the poetry in everyday things. He nodded, pleased. Poetry in everyday things. Yes, that's a good way to put it. Martha would have liked that phrase, too. He paused, then a hesitant look crossed his face. I was wondering, Eleanor. Ich know this is asking a lot after I've already imposed on your morning, but some off her button jars, they're just sitting there. I don't know what to do with them. Children wouldn't want them, would you? Would you perhaps like to see them sometime? Maybe you could even, I don't know, find a use for some of them if you're crafty at all. His request hung in there. It was more than just about buttons. I knew it was an invitation to step further into his world, to share more of Martha's legacy, and perhaps to help him navigate this new linear chapter of his life. It was also an opportunity for me, a chance to deepen this unexpected connection. My own life, while peaceful, had its quiet stretches, moments where I missed the easy companionship Robert had provided. Arthur, I said, a warm smile spreading across my face. I would be delighted to see Martha's button collection, and yes, Edo dabble in a bit of crafting now and then. Perhaps we could even think of a little project to do with them, something to honor her memory. His relief was palpable. Oh, Eleanor, that would be wonderful, truly wonderful. He drained his coffee cup and set it carefully on the coaster. I feel lighter, he said almost to himself. Just talking about her, sharing these things, it's like opening a window in a stuffy room. I knew exactly what he meant, and as I looked at him, at this kind, gentle man who had knocked on my door in his moment of quiet need, I felt a window opening in my own life, too, letting in a breath of fresh air and the promise of a new unexpected friendship. The old chenille robe suddenly didn't feel quite so old, and the Saturday morning felt brighter than it had in a very long time. Though you won't believe what happened wasn't some grand dramatic event. It was this quiet, profound unfolding, this gentle collision off to solitary lives, finding solace and connection in the most unexpected of ways. The rest of that Saturday unfolded with a gentle rhythm that was new and yet felt entirely natural. After our second cups of coffee, Arthur, with a newfound lightness in his step, excused himself, promising to bring over a few off Martha's button jars later in the week, perhaps on Wednesday afternoon, if that suited me. It did. We walked to the door, and as he stepped out onto the porch, he turned back. Eleanor, he said, his pale after our second cups of coffee, blue eyes sincere. Thank you for the coffee, for listening, for everything. Thank you, Arthur, I replied, meaning it just as much, for trusting me with Martha's little star, and for sharing her stories. He gave a small, almost shy nod, and then with a wave, he walked back across the street, his posture a little straighter than when he'd arrived. I watched him go, then closed the door, a soft smile playing on my lips. The house didn't feel quite so empty. The little Horthia sat on the side table, a quiet, green presence, already feeling like a part of the room, a tiny anchor for this new connection. The rest of my day was spent in a sort of pleasant haze. I did eventually tackle the crossword, but Mimmin kept drifting back to my conversation with Arthur. I thought about Martha, a woman I'd known only superficially, yet now felt a kinship with through her husband's memories and her small, cherished possessions. I thought about the surprising intimacy of our exchange, how two people, neighbors for decades, could suddenly find such common ground, such easy understanding. It was a reminder that beneath the surface of everyday life, there are always currents of deeper feeling, of shared human experience waiting to be discovered. Later that afternoon, I found the perfect spot for the Horthia. It was on the windowsill in my small sunroom at the back of the house, a room I often used for reading and quiet contemplation. It would get the gentle morning sun Martha had prescribed, and it was surrounded by my other more subdued plants, a collection of jade plants, a rather stoic looking aloe, and a trailing string of pearls. It looked right at home there as I watered it. I found myself humming a little tune, something I hadn't done in ages. I even said a few words to it. Welcome to your new home, little star. I hope you'll be happy here. It felt a bit silly, but also rather nice. The following days passed with a subtle shift in their texture. I found myself looking across the street more often, noticing the lights on in Arthur's house in the evening, wondering what he was doing. It wasn't a prying curiosity, but a gentle awareness, a feeling of connection that hadn't been there before. On Wednesday afternoon, true to his word, Arthur knocked on my door again. This time I was dressed, though I greeted him with the same warm smile. He carried a small cardboard box, and his nervousness from the previous visit was gone, replaced by a quiet anticipation. Come in, Arthur, I said. I've just put the kettle on. Tea or coffee today? Tea would be lovely, Eleanor. Thank you, he replied. Eyes crinkling at the corners, we settled in the living room again and carefully placed the box on the coffee table. Inside, nestled in tissue paper were 3 large glass jars, each filled to the brim with buttons of every imaginable size, shape, color, and material. There were mother-of-pearl buttons, tiny jet black ones, bright plastic daisies from the 60s, ornate brass military buttons, and simple wooden toggles. It was a kaleidoscope of miniature histories. Oh, Arthur, I breathed, genuinely captivated. They're wonderful. A treasury, a treasure trove. He beamed, his pleasure evident. Martha would spend hours sorting them, marrying them by color or material. Sometimes she'd just run her hands through them like a child with a chest of jewels. He picked up a particularly beautiful one, a deep sapphire blue glass button with a silver inlay. This one, he said, his voice soft with memory, was from a dress she wore on our 25th anniversary. We went to a fancy restaurant downtown. She looked so beautiful that night. His eyes misted over for a moment, but had blinked it away, offering me a gentle smile. She kept everything. We spent the next hour looking through the buttons, Arthur sharing little anecdotes connected to some of them, me marveling at the variety and artistry. It wasn't just about the buttons, it was about the stories they held, the life they represented. It was a way for Arthur to shari Martha, to keep her memory alive, not just in his heart but with some O'Neills who could appreciate her quiet passions. As we sifted through the colorful array, I felt a deep sense of privilege. He was entrusting me with these small, intimate pieces of his past, of his love story. It was a profoundly emotional experience, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, deeply resonant manner. There was a mutual respect that flowed between us, an understanding that transcended the ordinary neighborly acquaintance. I found myself learning so much about him, about Martha, about the enduring power of love and memory. You know, Arthur, I said, picking up a handful of small, mismatched floral buttons, I have an idea. I have an old plain quilted throw. It's a bit boring actually. Perhaps we could sew some of these onto it. Create a sort of memory quilt, something beautiful and useful, a way to give these buttons a new life while honoring Martha. His face lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. Eleanor, that's a wonderful idea. New Rudna. Martha would have loved that. She was always making things, repurposing things. She hesitated, then asked, would you let me help? My eyesight isn't what it used to be for fine needlework, but I could sort buttons, maybe even manage some of the larger ones. Of course, Arthur, I said warmly. I wouldn't dream of doing it without you. We can make it a joint project. And so a new routine began to establish itself. Once or twice a week, Arthur would come over, sometimes with another jar of buttons, sometimes just for a cup of tea and a chat. We started working on the memory quilt. My living room, once the domain of my solitary pursuits, now often echoed with his quiet chuckles. With our shared reminiscences, we chose buttons and decided on their placement. My old chenille robe still made its appearance on Saturday mornings, but now those mornings sometimes included a friendly wave to Arthur across the street, or even a shared coffee on my porch if the weather was fine. The subtle tension of that first unexpected knock had long since dissolved, replaced by an easy camaraderie, a comfortable, respectful friendship that had blossomed in the most unexpected way. It was a personal discovery for both of us. I think for Arthur it was a way to navigate his grief, to find connection and purpose. For me, it was a delightful surprise, a reminder that life can always offer new joys, new friendships. Even when you think you are settled into your quiet groove, you won't believe what happened wasn't just about a knock on the door. It was about opening the door, literally and figuratively, to a deeper, more meaningful connection with the world around me, starting with the man who lived just across the street. It was about the quiet magic of shared stories and the enduring beauty of small, cherished things. Our button project became a gentle centerpiece to our weekly meetings. The plain cream-colored throw I'd unearthed from the linen closet began to bloom with color and texture. We'd sit often in comfortable silence, sometimes with soft, classical music playing in the background. I discovered Arthur had a fondness for Chopin, and sort through the jars he had a surprisingly good eye for a new tapestry color combinations, often pointing out a button I might have overlooked that would be perfect for a particular spot. My needle, though not as swift as it once was, moved steadily, stitching these tiny fragments of Martha's life and now Arthur's into a new tapestry. Each button seemed to whisper its own story as I sewed it on. A small, pearly one from a baby's christening gown Arthur had told me belonging to their daughter, a sturdy leather-bound one from an old gardening jacket Martha had worn till it frayed, a gaudy sparkling one she bought on a Wyman, a seaside holiday, just because It made her laugh. It wasn't just a quilt we wear making, it was a chronicle, a tangible collection of memories. Through these sessions, I learned more about Arthur's life before Martha's passing than an engineer, meticulous and thoughtful qualities. I could see in the careful way he handled the buttons and considered their placement. He spoke of their travels, not grand adventures, but quiet explorations of nearby towns, visits to botanical gardens, and annual trips to a small coastal village where Martha loved to collect seashells, another of her quiet passions. He even brought over a small box of her most treasured shells one afternoon, each one perfect and unique, and we found a way to incorporate a few tiny ones into the quilt's border nestled amongst the buttons like hidden jewels. My daughter, a new friend Sarah, called me one Saturday morning. "Mom, you sound different," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "Happier? What's going on?" I smiled into the phone, glancing at the little Horthia on the sunroom windowsill, which was thriving. "Oh, nothing much, dear," I said, "just made a new friend, that's all." I told her about Martha's plant and our button quilt. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's really nice, Mom. I'm glad." I think she understood more than words could say, that this newfound connection was filling a space in my life I hadn't even conscious likened was empty. The quilt grew, stitch by stitch, button by button. It became a riot of color and memory, a testament to a life well lived and a love well remembered. And as it grew, so did our friendship. Arthur was no longer just Mr. Jenkins from across the street. He was Arthur, my friend, a kind and gentle soul, with a surprising wit and a deep capacity for love. He started bring over little things, a particularly interesting article from the newspaper he thought I'd enjoy, a bloom from his own struggling rose bush, which I gave him some tips on reviving. Once even a small, slightly lopsided apple pie he'd attempted to bake himself, a tribute to Martha's culinary skills. It wasn't the best pie I'd ever tasted, but it was made with such affection that it was delicious in its own way. I in turn would share freshly baked cookies or a new book I thought he might like. Our interactions were simple, unassuming, yet the initial vulnerability fulfilling. There was no pretense, no agenda, just mutual respect and a genuine enjoyment of each other's company. The initial vulnerability I'd felt that first morning standing there in my robe had transformed into a comfortable openness. We could talk about anything, current events, memories of our spaces, the changing seasons, the small joys and frustrations of daily life. One afternoon, as we were nearing the completion of the quilt, Arthur looked at it, his eyes soft. "Martha would have been so touched by this, Eleanor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given her buttons, her memories, a new story. You've given me you've helped me see that there can still be new stories." I reached out and gently squeezed his hand where it rested on the arm of his chair. "We've written this new story together, Arthur," I said, "and it's a beautiful one." The day we finally finished the quilt was a quiet triumph. We spread it out on my living room floor. It was magnificent, a vibrant, tactile his story. Every inch of it spoke of love, of care, of shared moments. Arthur just stared at it for a long time, a slow smile spreading across his face. "It's more beautiful than I ever imagined," he whispered. "We decided it should live on the old wooden chest in my hallway, where it could be seen and appreciated. All coming splash of color and warmth." The first time I saw Arthur glance at it, Ash was leaving a look of quiet pride and gratitude on his face. My heart felt full. Me life hadn't been overturned by that knock on the door. Instead, it had been enriched, deepened. The solitude I had once cherished hadn't been diminished, but it was now complemented by a meaningful connection that brought unexpected joy and a renewed sense of purpose. I still wore my old chenille robe on Saturday mornings, still enjoyed me coffee and the quiet contemplation of my garden. But now there was an added layer of warmth, a sense of anticipation for the small, shared moments that had become such a precious part of my week. You won't believe what happened wasn't about a dramatic plot twist. It was about the profound and quiet miracle of human connection, of finding a friend in an unexpected place, of discovering that, even in the later chapters of life, there are always new ways to grow, to shari, and to find beauty in the everyday. It was about a neighbor, a robe, a plant and a collection of buttons, and how these simple things wove together a story of emotional discovery and mutual respect, leaving me with a heart full of gratitude and a life a little brighter, a little fuller than before. And that, I think, is a story worth believing.